Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Frank, very much. I'm Sue.
And I'm Pat.
And I was thinking a few weeks ago, getting ready to come to the show, that, my goodness, it's been 20 years since the Beatles Quilt won Best of Show, which was, it almost makes me, I said I might cry. Yeah, so, it was such a big thing for us when the quilt won in 1998. We were, 20 years younger, and we had made this quilt as a collaborative quilt, and we of course loved it and thought it was a really great concept, but it's a little different. And think 20 years ago, it wasn't like your normal average quilt. And so we were at the awards ceremony, and it didn't win any of the awards. We got to the best of show award, and Pat and I were just sure that the judges didn't get it.
They just didn't get it.
And
It's okay.
We were totally shocked and surprised that it had won Best of Show, and it's just been a really fabulous journey with the Beatles quilt from that point on.
So why did we make this quilt? Some of you may wonder. It actually, the idea came to us. We had been trying to make some collaborative quilts. We'd done Blackbirds Fly 2 years before this quilt, and it won a ribbon at the AQS show in Paducah, which was great. So that gave us encouragement to maybe do another collaboration. And at the time we were thinking of this, there was a TV special called the Beatles Anthology, and they sort of traced the history of the Beatles and the beginnings of the band and playing all the music. And we both sort of said, oh, we remember that. We remember being up we shared a bedroom together, and we had our little record player, and we put the records on, and we learned every word, little 45s, and just had such good memories of that. And that was all through our junior high and high school years that the Beatles music was coming out, and oh my gosh, we had every album. We have an older brother, so he was also helping buy the records, and it just was just a great memory for us.
Yeah, so a lot of people will say, oh, you girls were just, obsessed with the Beatles, I guess, but not really. It's like a memory quilt for us, and you'll hear a Beatles song, and it just takes you back to to that time in our life, and so we thought it would just be a great subject for an applique quilt. It became a lot more than what we had expected when we first started. It probably took us about 2 years from start to finish. We started it in 1996, and it's all original design, so everything is out of our heads, our little imagination, what we think, comes from each of the songs. And it's all done in a method that we developed in the 90s called stitched raw edge machine applique. So everything is machine stitched, machine quilted, machine pieced. And it's a technique that allows us to get really good detail in applique. So we were able to, I think, do this quilt because of that technique, to get the small detail in all of the applique blocks, and to really tell a story with this kind of theme type of a quilt.
And I remember when we first started experimenting, doing some little samples, I was so excited when we did the first little test, and I thought, this is going to work. We're going to be able to make anything we can draw, we're going to be able to have on the quilt in applique. And then the other thing, so once we decided, let's try to make this quilt, well, what is it going to look like? What is the overall layout going to be? And we love looking at antique quilts and being inspired by old quilts. So we found a quilt, and you probably remember the name of it?
So it's called the Sarah Ann Garges quilt, and it's from the Museum of American Folk Art. And it's a top. It was never quilted. But we loved the set of it. We wanted places to do really great applique blocks. So we like traditional style, kind of block-based quilts. We wanted great borders to be able to do the borders. And then I'm, definitely into machine quilting and feathers, and so we wanted open areas to be able to do some really nice quilting on it. And so that quilt was a really great inspiration for the set of the quilt.
And then something people like to know is, well, how do you work on a quilt together? And what we did is we started collecting fabric, and we were thinking of, the Sgt. Pepper's cover with those bright colors that the Beatles wore in their costumes, sort of colors that reminded us of the 60s, and collected fabric, and then split them down the middle. So everything we got, Sue would find something, I would find something, and so we were both working from the same palette of fabrics, and then we sort of just divided up the quadrants and the borders. So we didn't, we each had our own things we were designing and making, but they were all going to eventually go together.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people will say that they look at the quilt and it looks like one person made it. It doesn't look so much like there were two different styles going on. And I think because we're sisters, did we mention that?
We're sisters.
That we have the same design sense or kind of style. I definitely can tell a difference between our kind of design styles, but it's a kind of a subtle thing. I think that should I say it?
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead.
So I've always said that I'm kind of have more fuller kind of voluptuous designs, and Pat is more tight and tiny. So that's what, yeah. So you could maybe see that a little bit in our quilt. So so then we weren't living near each other at the time that we made this quilt. Pat was in Muskegon, Michigan, and then I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Since then, Pat has moved to Ann Arbor, and we're closer together. But so we would work very independently on our portions of the quilt. So, for instance, I did the top left. Did I do? No, you did the top left quadrant of applique design.
Yes.
I did the top right quadrant, and so we had the whole set and the size of all the blocks, and we would, like Pat said, do our own designing and our own applique stitching. Pat did the lower right quadrant and I did the lower left quadrant. I was the designer of the center medallion. Pat did the bottom border and the right border and the top border, and I did the left border. And Pat was the piecer, and then I was the quilter. So that was how the division.
I did a little quilting.
You did a little
but she was the main quilter.
I was the main. Where did you quilt it?
I think up at the top.
At the top. I think you're right. I think I do remember. So it was 20 years ago. It's hard to remember.
Yeah, it's hard to remember yesterday.
It's hard to remember. Yeah, that's right. So.
Okay. So what was I thinking about?
So the original. It's all original design. So people will ask.
Where did we get where did these images come from?
Images come from. So they're all, original design. We, again, like Pat said, look at antique quilts a lot for inspiration. So some of the sets on each of the block might come from looking at some of those early sort of folk art applique quilts of the 1800s. I call this kind of style of quilt that we did a contemporary Baltimore style, because the early Baltimore albums were very symbolic applique, and this is really all about symbolism. We can talk a little bit about some of the individual blocks that what they represent.
What I want to say is where we got whatever's on there is on there is that we listened to the lyrics of the Beatles songs, and we stuck to the songs that they wrote. So the early albums, they had maybe half covers of other artists and then their own, and the songs were very She Loves You, I Love You, P.S. I Love You, or there was not a lot of source of imagery.
I say Pat got the hardest quadrant, because the top left quadrant is the early three albums, the first three albums, which are very sort of very simple lyrics, and But then she got the fun of having the later ones that had the white album
all
and some
all
of the
kinds
weird,
of imagery,
kind of weird kind of things going on. So it was really fun. So the center is a tree of life. So a lot of traditional quilts have tree of life imagery. And it's an apple tree for Apple Records.
So we were trying to think, what does a tree have to do with the Beatles? An apple tree.
An apple tree. And then the 4 blocks surrounding are what we call the album blocks, and they each represent one of the Beatles. So I think the top, the one on the far right is George Harrison.
I can't read that.
It's the one we have a photograph of, so I see it all the time in the lectures. And so, when you look at an album, a traditional kind of album applique block, we have hands and guitars instead of flowers and leaves, and so we thought that was kind of appropriate. In the quilting in that center area, I love traditional quilting concepts, so a crosshatch grid seemed really appropriate, and then I wanted to incorporate some feather designs. In free motion writing around the tree, it says, "And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And those are the last lines from the last song that Lennon and McCartney wrote together. So that was very, very good.
Yeah.
Very good, very
Yeah.
touching. So,
Yeah.
so Pat could talk about maybe some of her blocks and maybe.
Well, we can start at the. No.
Yeah.
I mean, it just depends on how much you want to know.
No,
we
yeah.
can talk about this.
So
you wanna do borders?
so talk about your border.
Well, the two borders, the one on the left has a vine with hands, and that is for I Want to Hold Your Hand, which was the first #1 hit they had in the U.S.
We remember in the U.S.
Yeah.
There were other #1 hits in England first,
Right,
but
right.
it was the first one.
And the hand is a very common image in old quilts, and the little heart and hand.
yeah.
And where we got the hands, where we traced our hands, and my two daughters and your two daughters.
So it had some.
We shrank them. They were,
we traced around them,
but we
and I shrunk them down.
So those are all of the girls.
Yeah.
And then the right hand border is for the song "Free as a Bird," which was put out during the Beatles Anthology, and it's a song John Lennon had started writing and composing before he died. So the rest of the surviving Beatles got together and added to it, and we thought that was a good, kind of a first and a last.
Yeah.
And I love to do kind of fantasy birds. So
I know people will ask, now what type of bird is that? It's a fantasy bird.
They're really not
nothing
real.
About that bird.
But I love this story. So when Sue was basically quilting that, and that's probably of course the last
it would have
part
been the last border
that you
I
were
did.
quilting. So she's kind of
120
really
hours into
getting
the quilting.
crazy about this. So she decided that since at that time, and perhaps now, I don't know, in the UK they referred to women as birds. They say, "Oh yeah, I'm dating this bird." So Sue
was a good.
was that kind of Liverpool?
That's kind of a good Liverpool accent, yeah.
So Sue decided, she started at the top and she named each of the birds for the women in the Beatles' life.
So so that was a little crazy little side thing about the Beatles quilt. So
all right, the top?
let's see.
The top is basically 1962 to 1970 are the years that they were together as a band and recorded. And then the bottom border, and I love doing these intricate pieced sort of sunburst shapes. So there's a ton of Beatles songs that refer to the sun. So that's what that's to represent.
So this one here is for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. And we were trying really hard to not use any copy any imagery from Beatles albums, or we wanted to all be original design. And I originally had the center, I had drawn like the drum from the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club band, and then it said Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, and it looked too much like that, like it was a copy of that. So I just started all over again and threw that one away, and I did the 4 hearts in the colors of the uniforms on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, and then they have sad faces, so they're the Lonely Hearts, which was much better as an original concept, I think, than using that. Yellow Submarine was an album, but it also was the song, and it's probably the most recognized block of the quilt. I know that they were telling us here at the museum, it's the one that people recognize even if they're not super familiar with Beatles songs. There's little records over here that are the 3
the record labels that the Beatles recorded on.
Yeah. And so
a little map of England with a little heart where Liverpool is.
So should I show this?
Oh, all right.
So we were at the show in obviously in 1998, and a group of British quilters were at the show, and they were quite impressed with the Beatles quilt. And
their Beatles.
And we remember them saying to us, now why, I don't do accents, so Pat could do.
Oh, now why would you make a quilt about our Beatles?
There you go, perfect. And we said, well, we think they're kind of ours too. We love them just as much
we
as
bought
you
the
did.
records.
And then a few seconds later, but we love it so much that would you like to come and teach for us? And so we arranged to go teach in Birmingham area of England in 1999. And we, of course, this is a purchase award, and it lives in the National Quilt Museum, which we're very, very happy about that. It's where it should be, but we don't have the quilt to show. We just have slides of the quilt. And Pat and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have something physical that we could take of the Beatles quilt? So we made a smaller version of the Beatles quilt, and we call it the Baby Beatles quilt. And I take it with me whenever I'm lecturing.
We'll let them hold it.
Yeah, let's see, where's the top? So it's just kind of a scaled down version of the Beatles quilt. Yeah. So you can see, so we had a lot of the same fabric and
We used the same fabric
yeah.
that kind of left over, and then
And-
designed new blocks.
So I will say that I'm very willing to say this. So the lower square block is for the song When I'm 64, which is a favorite song of mine this year because I will be 64.
And I've
this
gotten
year.
all year to say I'm 64.
So this is an important block for us, and we've all given away our secrets there. So center is for Tangerine Trees on Marmalade Skies from Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Oobla-dee, oobla-da, Molly is a
Come
singer.
Together, and then Hey Jude.
Hey Jude, yeah.
And then the borders again are kind of smaller versions of it. But on the back of the quilt, we wrote the lyrics to all 181 original Beatles songs, and we did it in with just a Pigma Micron Pigma marker and hand
wrote it. And it's interesting because from a distance, when you look at the back, you know, each song is kind of grouped, and then I would change directions and she would change directions. So it makes a kind of a cool texture on the back, and then when you get up close, you realize it's words.
Well, and then we thought that 181 Beatles songs
Lyrics
would fill it up completely, but there were little gaps, and so we wrote little factoids about the Beatles all throughout the back of the quilt. So, and the back of the baby Beatles quilt has the titles all the way around the outside of it. We were not going to write on the whole
Not going to do that again.
Yeah, we learned our lesson. So we went to England, and we met Paul. No. Wouldn't that have been the great way to end the story?
We saw Paul.
We did.
We went to see him in Detroit a few years ago.
But our friend, we didn't teach in Liverpool, but our friend Iris Taylor, who hosted us there, she took us to Liverpool, and so we went to all the Beatles sites.
Strawberry Fields and Penny
with
Lane.
the baby Beatles quilt. So Iris insisted, even though we weren't teaching there, that we bring the baby Beatles quilt so that we could say it's been to Penny Lane and it's been to Strawberry Fields and the Cavern Club, and every stop we had a little picture with us with the baby Beatles quilt. So quite an adventure, and we had been back quite a few times to teach in England. We built a nice friendship with the British quilters who invited us over. So it was great fun. So we just are happy to celebrate a 20-year anniversary of the Beatles quilt. It's just so hard to believe that it's been 20 years since all of our friends were there, and they hooted and hollered, and it was just the most. It was like you were at the Academy Awards and you won Best Picture. You know.
Well, I say winning Best of Show at the American Quilter Society, it's like getting an Oscar and being Miss America.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. You're right.